Harry Hopkins conferred with Mr. Eden as they awaited the arrival of Premier Stalin, the man Russia wants to forget. The 8-day meeting laid the plans for a charter meeting of the United Nations, as they agreed that nothing less than unconditional surrender must be Germany's lot. As they met, German resistance was collapsing, and the war was to end in Europe just 2 months later.
Yalta Talks, Seeds of Discontent. The major world powers all had separate agendas. Britain wanted to make sure that both them and France were well repaired from significant damage from the Nazis. The U.S. wanted the Russians to help in defeating the Japanese in the Pacific, as well as that the Marshall Plan be used to help repair both Germany and Japan after the war. And finally, the Russians wanted total control of almost all of Eastern Europe, as well as complete disarmament of Germany, to make sure this could never happen again. Note that both Britain and the U.S. wanted to create the UN to organize world power.
Throughout the world, throngs of people hailed the end of the war in Europe. It is 5 years and more since Hitler marched into Poland. Years full of suffering and death and sacrifice. Now the war against Germany is won. A grateful nation gives thanks for victory. Hundreds of thousands crowd into American churches to give thanks to God. President Truman announced the official surrender.
This is a solemn but glorious hour. I wish that Franklin D. Roosevelt had lived to see this day. General Eisenhower informs me that the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations. The flags of freedom fly all over Europe.
Seeds of Discontent come to fruition. May 7th, 1945. Victory in Europe Day represents the end of World War II. The involved countries were realigning and determining the future of their economies. At this time, most of Eastern Europe had allied itself with Russia because the Red Army had successfully freed them from the Nazi control. By the end of 1945, 2 of the 3 leaders from the Yalta Conference were gone, leaving an uncertain Stalin to deal with new and suspicious partners. At this time, most of Eastern Europe had allied themselves with Russia because the Red Army had successfully freed them from Nazi control. After the preliminary restoration of their large cities, such as Stalingrad, the Russians felt a need to protect themselves from now expanding Western Europe. There was deep distrust on the Soviet side as they had just undergone deep invasions, and a fear of losing control of their country was forming. This feeling was clearly mutual. Western Europe was afraid of this newly powerful Russian nation, communism, and Stalin himself. The Soviets began to set up a buffer zone by setting up puppet states such as Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Poland through their Sovietization program. Recognizing the risks of the Soviet power, England's Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill spoke in a public speech in the U.S. President Truman attended this speech. Churchill spoke of the expansionistic policies of the Soviets, in addition to the Iron Curtain, in which he coined in this speech, that had descended upon Eastern Europe. The term Iron Curtain refers to the wall separating the communist Eastern Europe from Western Europe. This was a huge industrial investment. The entire wall stretched from the northern tip of Finland and stretched down into Bulgaria. According to the University of Oregon, after Stalin's death in 1953, a wave of popular revolt spread across Eastern Europe. In 1955, West Germany was admitted to NATO. The Soviet Union responded by forming the Warsaw Pact and used troops to suppress popular agitation in East Germany, Poland, and Hungary, as they would do so again in Czechoslovakia in 1968. By the end of the decade, over 2.7 million East Germans had left their homes and migrated west, a loss in prestige that forced the East German government to construct the Berlin Wall in 1961. It not only divided the city, but also became a symbol of a divided Europe. The purpose of the Iron Curtain was that it was not only part of the Yalta deal, it was space given to the Russians as a buffer against any future invasions. Essentially, it allowed the Soviet Union to isolate itself politically, militarily, and ideologically. In terms of a physical form, it came in many shapes. The most predominant is the wall separating Germany in half. Others were mainly just exterior border defenses, such as towers, roadblocks, and small bunkers. By the 1980s, political unrest and economic decline had taken their toll. In April 1989, Poland peacefully elected an anti-communist government, effectively ending the days of Soviet rule there. This started a wave of protests, thwarting off communist authority and changes in government in Hungary, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, and Romania. But the biggest change came on November 9th, 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell and Germans on both sides reunited for the first time in over 40 years. With the official dismantling of the wall in 1990 and the reunification of German currencies that July, the fall of the Iron Curtain was complete.
Good evening, everyone. From the west side of the Berlin Wall at the Brandenburg Gate, I'm Tom Brokaw. The Brandenburg Gate, of course, is in East Berlin, and the sound that you hear and what you're seeing tonight, not hammers and sickles, but hammers and chisels as young people take down this wall bit by bit. Earlier this evening, the Communist Central Committee in East Berlin proposed an action program, including free elections and a democratic coalition government. Tonight, citizens from both Germanys are singing and dancing on the wall itself, reunited right on top of that harsh symbol of division.